He stood on the precipice of his greatest triumph, the king of a corporate empire with a vibrant younger woman on his arm. He told his wife of 20 years that she was an anchor, a relic of a life he had outgrown. He discarded her, believing he was trading up, securing his legacy. But what he never knew was that the quiet, unassuming woman he left behind was the architect of his entire world. She wasn't just the woman who stood by him. She was the ghost in the machine, the anonymous billionaire who had funded his rise and now was about to orchestrate his spectacular fall. This is the story of how a man replaced his wife, not knowing he was firing the true CEO of his life. The city lights of New York spread out beneath the penthouse apartment like a carpet of scattered diamonds. From their 80th floor perch, Marcus Thorne could survey his kingdom. The air inside the sprawling minimalist space was always a perfect climate-controlled 72 degrees, a stark contrast to the city's humid summer embrace. Every surface gleamed polished chrome black marble and vast panes of glass that made the skyline an integral part of the decor. It was a home designed to be photographed, a monument to success. But for Saraphina Thorne, it had long felt like a beautiful, sterile cage. For 20 years, she had played the part of the perfect corporate wife. She hosted the flawless dinner parties where conversations were as carefully curated as the canapés. She chaired the charity galas, her serene smile, a familiar and reassuring presence in the society pages. She wore the couture gowns and the heirloom jewelry with an understated grace that made other women draped in louder declarations of wealth look gaudy. To the world, and indeed to her own husband, Saraphina was elegant, quiet, and utterly dependent, a beautiful accessory to his brilliant life. Marcus was the sun around which their world revolved. He was the CEO of Thorne Industries, a sprawling conglomerate with interests in technology, logistics, and private equity. He was a titan of industry, a self-made man whose narrative was the stuff of legend. He'd started with a modest loan and a bold idea, and through sheer force of will, as he so often recounted in interviews, he had built an empire. He was charismatic, ruthless in the boardroom, and possessed a restless energy that seemed to propel him ever forward. Lately, that energy had been directed everywhere but at Saraphina. The silence in their gilded cage had grown cavernous. The shared glances that once spoke volumes were now empty. Marcus's days bled into his nights. Board dinners, late-night strategy sessions. Investor calls with Hong Kong were the litany of excuses, each delivered with a touch more impatience than the last. He no longer saw her. When he looked in her direction, his gaze seemed to pass right through her, already focused on the next acquisition, the next headline, the next conquest. The first tangible sign of the impending schism appeared not with a bang, but with a digital ping. They were seated in their private theatre for a rare evening at home, the vast screen dark. Marcus was scrolling through his phone, a habit that had become as constant as his breathing. His thumb moved with relentless speed until a notification banner bloomed at the top of his screen. Saraphina's eyes, trained over 2 decades to read his every micro-expression, caught the flicker of a name before he hastily swiped it away. Chloe. Beside the name was a small heart emoji. It was a small thing, a digital whisper, but it landed in the quiet room with the force of a physical blow. Saraphina felt the air leave her lungs. She said nothing. Her posture unchanged, her hands resting calmly in the lap of her silk lounge pants. Inside a carefully constructed dam began to crack. The name, she discovered with a few discreet clicks on her own tablet later that night, belonged to Chloe Vance. She was 24 years old, an age that felt like a deliberate cruelty. Her online presence was a curated explosion of sun-drenched beaches, exclusive nightclub interiors, and designer outfits, each post accompanied by hashtags that screamed ambition. Girl boss, luxury life, manifesting. She was an influencer, a creature of the modern age, who sold a fantasy of effortless glamour. She was everything Saraphina was not: loud, overtly sexy, and hungry for the spotlight. The following week at the annual Met Gala, the whispers became a roar. Saraphina arrived on Marcus's arm, a vision in deep sapphire, but his attention was a tangible pulling force directed elsewhere. He scanned the crowd constantly, his smile tight, his eyes searching. Saraphina followed his gaze and found her. Chloe Vance. She was wearing a crimson dress that left little to the imagination. Her laughter high and piercing as she posed for the photographers with a practiced pout. Throughout the evening, Marcus found reasons to wander to network, but Saraphina watched a silent observer from her seat at their star-studded table. She saw the brief, charged touches, a hand on the small of Chloe's back, a whispered comment in her ear that made her throw her head back in that performative laugh. He was like a moth drawn to a garish, flickering flame, and he didn't care who saw him get burned. He was so consumed by the thrill of the new, he had forgotten the source of the old light that had guided him for so long. Returning to the penthouse that night, the silence in the limousine was thick with unspoken truths. As Saraphina stepped out of her gown, she caught her reflection in the floor-to-ceiling mirror. She saw the fine lines around her eyes, the product of countless sleepless nights, worrying over market fluctuations and investment strategies that Marcus believed were his own. She saw the quiet strength that he had mistaken for passivity. He saw a woman nearing 50, a wife to be pensioned off. He had no idea he was looking at his creator. For Saraphina was not just Mrs. Thorne. She was the ghost in his machine. She was the anonymous, reclusive figure known in the highest echelons of global finance only as Phoenix. And the empire Marcus so proudly called his own had been built from its very first brick upon the foundations of her vast inherited and brilliantly managed fortune. The modest loan he'd started with had been funneled to him through a blind trust she controlled. The revolutionary tech patents that had launched Thorne Industries into the stratosphere were the product of a research lab she funded anonymously. His greatest triumphs, the acquisitions he was lauded for, were the results of her meticulous behind-the-scenes analysis and capital injections. He was the face, the handsome, charismatic frontman. She was the architect, the strategist, the true billionaire. And as she stood there, the city lights twinkling behind her reflection, the first crack in the dam gave way, and a cold, clear resolve began to flow through her veins. The game had changed. He thought he was playing chess and sacrificing a queen. He was about to find out he was just a pawn on her board. The weeks that followed the Met Gala were a masterclass in psychological warfare executed with the chilling precision of a corporate takeover. Marcus, emboldened by the public frisson of his affair, shed any pretense of discretion. He began leaving Chloe Vance's designer shopping bags in the back seat of the Bentley. He took calls from her on the penthouse terrace, his voice a low, intimate murmur that carried on the evening breeze, each word a fresh wound. He was a man intoxicated by the reflection he saw in a younger woman's eyes, powerful, desired, reborn. The breaking point arrived on a Tuesday. It was the day of the annual Thorne Industries Foundation Gala, Saraphina's flagship charitable event. For 2 decades, She had poured her heart into the foundation, using it as a discreet vehicle to fund medical research and educational programs, a quiet counterpoint to her husband's loud commercialism. This year, the gala was to honor Dr. Alistair Finch, a pioneering geneticist, whose work Saraphina had personally championed and funded through the foundation, of course, for years. Saraphina was in the grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel, overseeing the final touches. The floral arrangements, a cascade of white orchids and hydrangeas, were perfect. The lighting was soft. The orchestra was tuning up. She was a portrait of calm control. Then Marcus arrived, and he was not alone. Chloe Vance was on his arm, poured into a gold sequin dress that was both spectacular and spectacularly inappropriate for the staid philanthropic event. She looked around the opulent ballroom with the wide, voracious eyes of a conqueror. The assembled guests, old money scions, titans of finance, respected academics, paused. A wave of whispers rippled through the room. It was a brazen, calculated act of humiliation. Marcus strode towards Saraphina, a defiant glint in his eye. "Saraphina," he said, his voice too loud. "I'd like you to meet Chloe. She's a new friend. I wanted her to see the good work the company does." Chloe offered a small, dismissive wave. "It's all very classic," she said, her gaze sweeping over the elegant decor with a hint of a sneer. Saraphina looked at her husband. She looked at the young woman beside him, who was radiating a triumphant smirk. In that moment, Saraphina saw the full, pathetic scope of his midlife crisis. He wasn't just leaving her. He was trying to erase her, to overwrite her legacy with this cheap, glittering facsimile. She felt a profound, chilling clarity. There was no anger, no hysteria. There was only the quiet hum of a decision solidifying into action. She inclined her head slightly. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice even and cool, addressing him as if he were a junior associate. "The gala is for our donors and honorees. Perhaps your guest would be more comfortable in a different setting. The bar, perhaps." The color drained from Marcus's face. He had expected tears a scene. He had not expected this icy dismissal. Before he could retort, Saraphina turned her back on him and walked gracefully towards the stage to welcome her guests, leaving him standing awkwardly with his glaringly out-of-place companion. The room, which had been buzzing, fell into a stilted silence, the social rebuke absolute. Later that night, the penthouse was a battlefield. "How dare you!" Marcus roared, his voice echoing off the marble floors. He had shed his tuxedo jacket and ripped off his bow tie. "You embarrassed me." "You embarrassed Chloe." Saraphina sat in a low armchair, a glass of water untouched on the table beside her. She didn't flinch. "You embarrassed yourself, Marcus. You brought a garish headline to a place of substance. You confused notoriety with respect. They are not the same thing. Substance respect." He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "This is my company. My foundation. My money that pays for those ridiculous flowers and your pet projects. You live in a world I built." "Is that so?" Saraphina asked softly, a dangerous calm in her eyes. "Yes, it is." He paced before her, energized by his own fury. "And I'm done. I'm done with this marriage, this mausoleum you call a home. I'm done with you." He stopped and looked down at her, his face a mask of contempt. "I want a divorce, Saraphina. I want a new life. I want to be with someone who is vibrant and alive, someone who looks at the future, not just the past. Chloe inspires me. You bore me." The words were meant to be daggers, and while they stung, they struck not flesh but armor. "I've already had my lawyers draw up the papers," he continued, pressing his advantage. "I'm being more than generous. You'll get this apartment a stipend that will allow you to continue this lifestyle you're accustomed to. It's a clean break, a golden parachute for my retiring wife." He stood there, proud and preening, utterly convinced of his own magnanimity. He was firing her from the job of being his wife, offering a severance package he deemed appropriate for her 20 years of service. The sheer breathtaking arrogance of it was almost sublime. Saraphina slowly rose from her chair. She walked to the vast window and looked out at the city she secretly owned. "Generous?" She repeated the word, tasting like ash in her mouth. "A stipend, a golden parachute." She turned to face him, and for the first time in years, Marcus saw a flicker of something in her eyes he didn't recognize. It wasn't sadness. It was power. "I think you should have your lawyers call my lawyer in the morning, Marcus," she said. "I've retained Benjamin Carter. I'm sure your team knows him." The mention of Benjamin Carter gave Marcus a moment's pause. Carter was a legend in corporate law, a shark who only swam in the deepest, bloodiest waters. Why would Saraphina need someone like that for a simple divorce? "Fine," Marcus snapped, dismissing the flicker of unease. "Have Carter call them. The offer is the offer. It's non-negotiable. I'm leaving for the Hamptons with Chloe in the morning. I'll have my things sent for later." He turned and strode towards the master suite to pack a bag, a man convinced he had just closed the deal of a lifetime. He was shedding his past to embrace a glittering future. Saraphina remained by the window. She picked up her phone and made a single call. "Benjamin," she said, her voice steady. "It's done. He's made his move." "Are you all right, Saraphina?" The voice on the other end was warm, with a concern that spanned 3 decades of friendship and professional confidence. "I'm perfectly fine," she replied, a hint of steel in her tone. "It's time to activate the protocols, all of them. Start with the patent portfolio for Project Chimera. I want the licensing agreement with Thorn Industries terminated, effective immediately." She disconnected the call and watched as a helicopter, its lights blinking, traversed the night sky. Marcus thought he was leaving her with an apartment and an allowance. He had no idea he was leaving with nothing but the clothes on his back and a name that by the time she was done would be utterly worthless. The unraveling had begun. The first tremor hit Thorn Industries at 9:15 a.m. the next morning. Marcus was speeding down the Long Island Expressway in his Aston Martin Chloe. Asleep in the passenger seat, the wind whipping through his hair. He felt reborn. His phone buzzed incessantly, but he ignored it, chalking it up to his frantic underlings, reacting to the news of his divorce. He was untouchable. In a sterile data center in Delaware, a digital switch was flipped. The exclusive licensing rights for the Chimera software suite, the revolutionary AI-driven logistics platform that was the beating heart of Thorn Industries' global supply chain, were officially revoked. The parent company on the license, a deliberately obscure entity named North Star Holdings, had exercised a non-renewal clause. No one at Thorn Industries knew who North Star Holdings was. It was just one of hundreds of vendors and partners in their ecosystem. But it was the one that mattered. By noon, chaos was erupting. Shipments were stalled in ports from Singapore to Rotterdam. Automated warehouses ground to a halt. The predictive analytics that drove the company's entire sales strategy went dark. The stock, which had opened strong, began to wobble as whispers of a major operational failure hit trading floors. This was Saraphina's world. This was the work of Phoenix. The story of Phoenix began 30 years prior. Saraphina wasn't born into the gilded society she now inhabited. Her father, Robert Chen, was a brilliant and deeply reclusive software engineer, one of the original architects of the open source movement. He was a ghost in the machine long before she was. He'd created foundational code that powered thousands of programs, but he eschewed fame and fortune, valuing privacy above all else. When he passed away, he left Saraphina his only child. With two things, a quiet, unshakable intellect, and a fortune so vast and complexly structured it was virtually invisible. It was a labyrinth of patents, intellectual property rights, and anonymous investments scattered across the globe, managed through a Swiss family office run by the Carter family for generations. Benjamin Carter wasn't just her lawyer. He was the son of her father's most trusted advisor. When Saraphina met Marcus, she was a graduate student in art history, deliberately living a modest life. She was charmed by his ambition, his dreams. He spoke of building things, of creating a legacy. She fell in love with the man she thought he could be, and she decided to help him build it. It was a romantic, secret project. Through Benjamin, she established Phoenix, an anonymous investment vehicle. The initial $2 million seed money that Marcus believed came from a high-risk venture capital firm was in fact from her. She bought the fledgling tech company, whose patents formed the basis of Thorn Industries' first great success. Then had Phoenix license it to Marcus's shell of a company on ridiculously favorable terms. Over 2 decades, she had played a secret, intricate game. When Marcus wanted to expand into green energy, she had Phoenix secretly acquire 3 cutting-edge solar startups and then sell them to Thorn Industries for a fraction of their worth, making him look like a negotiating genius. When he struggled with international expansion, her network of anonymous contacts and holding companies smoothed the way, securing permits and dissolving red tape. She fed him ideas through casual dinner conversation, planting the seeds of his greatest insights. "I was reading about biometric security. Darling, it seems to be the future," she would say. And 6 months later, Marcus would launch a new division, preening at his own foresight. He was the conductor waving his baton for the cheering crowd. He never knew that she owned the orchestra, the instruments, and the concert hall itself. Now, sitting with Benjamin in the discreet, art-filled office of the Carter & Associates law firm, Saraphina was methodically taking her orchestra back. "The Chimera patent is withdrawn," Benjamin confirmed, sliding a tablet across the polished mahogany desk. "Their entire logistics network is paralyzed. Their CTO, a man named Richards, has been trying to contact North Star Holdings all morning. He's been routed to a call center in Mumbai." Saraphina allowed herself a small, grim smile. "Good. What's next?" "Project Nightingale," Benjamin said. "The portfolio of medical tech patents we licensed to their health division. We can pull those next. And then there's the matter of the Leeson acquisition." The Leeson acquisition had been Marcus's crowning achievement the year before, a hostile takeover of a rival firm that had cemented his reputation as a ruthless corporate raider. The financial world had marveled at how Thorn Industries had managed to secure the financing. Saraphina remembered the nights she had spent modeling the financial structures, the intricate web of debt and equity required. She had used Phoenix to act as the primary anonymous lender through 3 separate offshore banks. "Call the loans," Saraphina said, her voice devoid of emotion. "All of them. Cite the material adverse change clause in the lending agreement. The operational failure of the Chimera platform is more than sufficient justification. Benjamin raised an eyebrow. Saraphina, that's a kill shot. Calling in that much debt will trigger covenants across their entire financial structure. It will force a complete collapse. He'll be bankrupt. He told me I was boring, she said softly, her gaze distant. He said he built the world I lived in. He offered me a stipend. She looked at Benjamin, her eyes clear and hard. I'm not destroying Thorn Industries. I'm dissolving it. It was never his to begin with. I'm simply reclaiming my assets. The news reached Marcus as he was arguing with the concierge at a 5-star hotel in the Hamptons. His corporate black card had been declined. Chloe was looking on, her arms crossed her face, a mask of impatient disbelief. His phone rang. It was his CFO, frantic. Marcus, what the hell is going on? Our logistics are dead in the water. Something about a North Star. Holdings. And now I've just gotten calls from our bankers in Zurich and the Cayman Islands. They're calling in the leasen debt. All of it. They're saying we're in breach. The market is getting spooked. The stock is down 30%. Marcus felt a cold dread seep into his bones. This wasn't a simple operational glitch. This was a coordinated attack. It was too precise, too devastating. He sank onto a plush lobby sofa, his mind reeling. Northstar Holdings. The bankers. It made no sense. It was as if the invisible architecture of his company was being systematically dismantled by a ghost. Chloe tapped her foot impatiently. So are we getting a room or what? I thought you said this place was a sure thing. Marcus looked at her perfectly manicured nails, her expensive handbag, her face that showed no concern, only annoyance at the interruption of her pleasure. For the first time, he saw her not as an inspiration, but as a liability. There's a problem, he muttered, his voice hoarse. A big problem. Back in Manhattan, Saraphina stood before a large screen displaying the falling stock price of Thorn Industries. It was a waterfall of red. Each point represented a piece of her life's secret work, a piece she was now reclaiming. This wasn't just about money. It was about identity. For 20 years, she had allowed him to wear her accomplishments as his own. She had dimmed her light so his could shine brighter. Now she was turning the power back on, and the resulting glare would be blinding. The collapse of Thorn Industries was not a slow decline. It was a detonation. In the space of 48 hours, the company went from a Wall Street darling to a case study in catastrophic failure. The story of the Chimera platform's shutdown and the sudden calling of the leasen debt hit the financial news like a 1-2 punch. The stock didn't just fall, it plummeted into an abyss from which there was no recovery. Marcus Thorn, the visionary. The self-made titan was now a pariah. His phone, once a conduit for fawning investors and eager journalists, now brought only a torrent of rage from his board members and panicked calls from his executive team. He was trapped in a nightmare, swinging wildly at an enemy he couldn't see. He fired his chief technology officer for failing to have a backup for the Chimera system, not understanding that the system was the company and its owner had just turned the key. He screamed at his chief financial officer for the debt structure, unaware that the man was just as mystified by the lender's coordinated, merciless attack. He was a king, watching his castle disintegrate into dust, blaming the court jesters and the royal guards, while the foundations laid by a silent queen had been systematically removed. His gilded life with Chloe in the Hamptons quickly lost its sheen. The sycophantic friends who had surrounded them vanished. Invitations to exclusive parties dried up. Their first attempt to have dinner at a trendy waterfront restaurant ended in humiliation when Marcus's last personal credit card was declined. They were forced to retreat from the grand hotel to a modest rental paid for with the last of Chloe's available cash. The dynamic between them soured instantly. Chloe's adoration had been for Marcus Thorne, the Titan. This new version, a frantic, desperate man, constantly on the phone, his face pale with stress, held no appeal. "I don't understand why you can't just fix it," she whined one afternoon as Marcus paced the small living room of their rented beach house. "You're Marcus Thorne. Just call someone, get more money. It's not that simple," he snarled, turning on her. "The money is gone. The credit lines are frozen. Everything is connected. It's like someone has a blueprint of my entire company and is pulling it apart, piece by piece. So get a new blueprint." She snapped back, her patience worn thin. The promise of a life of endless luxury was evaporating, and with it, her affection. "I'm not a banker, Marcus. I'm a brand. Being with you right now is seriously damaging my brand." The argument escalated, fueled by fear and resentment. The fantasy she had bought into and the illusion he had constructed were crashing into a grim reality. The vibrant, inspiring muse had become a shrill, demanding burden. Desperate Marcus flew back to New York, hat in hand. He secured a meeting with Sterling Private Credit, a ruthless private investment firm known for feasting on the carcasses of dying companies. He walked into their glass and steel midtown office, a man hollowed out by defeat. He was no longer a peer, but a beggar. He sat across from a stern-faced man named Mr. Harrison, flanked by two analysts, who looked at him with the cold, detached curiosity of entomologists studying a bug. Marcus laid out his situation, framing it as a hostile, inexplicable corporate attack, and asked for a bridge loan to stabilize the company. Harrison listened patiently, his fingers steepled. When Marcus finished his desperate plea, the banker leaned forward, a predatory gleam in his eyes. "Mr. Thorne, we've been following your situation with great interest," Harrison began, his voice smooth and dangerous. "And our analysis is that you are not the victim of a random attack. You are the victim of a single, highly sophisticated entity." He motioned to one of his analysts, who slid a tablet across the table. On the screen was a complex diagram, a web of holding companies, shell corporations, and trusts, all flowing from a single central node. "We do a lot of business in the private debt market," Harrison continued, "and for years we've occasionally come up against a ghost. An investor who moves with impossible symptomology and precision. Someone who gets into deals before anyone else, who seems to know where the market is going before it moves. We've never been able to identify the principal. We just have a name for the operation. We call it Phoenix." Marcus stared at the diagram. He saw North Star Holdings, the company that owned the Chimera patent. He saw the names of the offshore banks that had financed the Leeson deal. He saw a dozen other entities, all connected to acquisitions and investments throughout the history of Thorne Industries. They were all branches of the same tree, and the root was labeled Phoenix. "For the last decade," Harrison said, his voice dropping, "Phoenix has been your silent and apparently majority partner. Every key technological asset, every major financial windfall you've had, can be traced back to a transaction involving one of these entities." Thorne Industries didn't just benefit from Phoenix. Our analysis suggests that in essence, Thorne Industries was a Phoenix project. A very public, very successful one until now. The air in the room grew thin. Marcus felt a wave of vertigo. His self-made narrative, the core of his identity, was being systematically obliterated by this calm, cold man. "What you're experiencing, Mr. Thorne," Harrison concluded, leaning back, "is not a hostile takeover. It's a liquidation. Phoenix is simply taking its assets back. And frankly, from where we sit, it doesn't look like there will be anything left. There's nothing for us to lend against. The house of cards is already on the floor." Harrison stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. "I'm curious about one thing, though," he said, pausing at the door. "Phoenix has always been a silent, stable force. We've never seen it act with such aggression, such finality. Whoever it is, you must have made them very, very angry." "Good day, Mr. Thorne." Marcus sat alone in the silent boardroom, the diagram of his own professional life glowing on the tablet screen before him. Phoenix. A ghost. A secret partner who had built him up and was now tearing him down. The name meant nothing to him. He thought back over 20 years, the lucky breaks, the deals that fell into his lap, the uncanny insights he'd believed were his own genius. A cold, terrifying suspicion began to creep into the edges of his consciousness. He thought of the quiet, unassuming woman he had cast aside. He remembered her intelligence, the books she read, the quiet observations she would make, that he had always dismissed as idle chatter. He remembered her mentioning her father, a reclusive academic long dead. And then a memory, sharp and sudden. Years ago, at a dinner party, a guest had been talking about the mythical bird that rises from the ashes. Saraphina had smiled faintly and said, "A powerful symbol of rebirth, of debts being paid." The blood drained from his face. It couldn't be. It was impossible. A coincidence, a mad, desperate thought. But as he stared at the name on the screen, a name that represented the architect of his rise and the author of his ruin, the impossible began to feel terrifyingly real. Phoenix. Saraphina. He had not just left his wife. He had abandoned his creator. And now he was facing the reckoning. 2 days later, a formal, hand-delivered letter arrived at the cheap rental in the Hamptons, where Marcus was hiding out. Chloe had left the day before her parting shot, a venomous declaration that her followers would not stand for this kind of second-hand failure. The letter was printed on heavy, cream-colored cardstock, devoid of any logo or letterhead. It was an invitation to a meeting. The address was not a law firm, nor was it the penthouse he once called home. It was a sleek, modern skyscraper in the heart of the financial district, a building he'd always admired but never known the primary tenant of. The meeting was scheduled for the following afternoon. The sender was simply signed S. He knew. The sliver of suspicion had grown into a monstrous certainty that consumed his waking thoughts and haunted his sleep. He spent the entire night staring at the ceiling, replaying 20 years of his life through this new horrifying lens. Every success, every accolade, every moment of pride now felt like a fraud. He was not a king. He was a puppet whose strings had just been cut. The next day, he put on his last good suit, a shadow of the man who had once worn it with such unshakable confidence. He took a taxi to the address, a man on his way to his own execution. The lobby was a cathedral of brushed steel and silent, intimidating security. When he gave his name, the guard nodded and directed him to a private elevator. There was only one button, PHX. The elevator opened directly into a vast, minimalist office that seemed to float above the city. The panoramic windows offered a view that dwarfed the one from his old penthouse. The space was furnished not with the opulent clutter of new money, but with the quiet confidence of old power. A single massive desk of reclaimed wood, a few strategically placed pieces of museum-quality sculpture and bookshelves filled with volumes on everything from quantum physics to ancient philosophy. And there, standing by the window silhouetted against the afternoon sun, was Saraphina. She was not the woman he had left. The quiet, almost timid wife was gone. In her place stood a figure of immense poise and authority. She wore a simple but impeccably tailored black dress. Her hair was pulled back, accentuating the sharp intelligence in her features. She turned to face him, and her eyes held no anger nor pain. They held only the cool, dispassionate calm of a CEO about to finalize a difficult but necessary transaction. "Marcus," she said, her voice even. "Thank you for coming." He stood, frozen in the center of the room, looking utterly lost. "Saraphina." "What is this place?" "This," she said with a small, sweeping gesture, "is my office, the central hub of my family's financial operations, or as your friend Mr. Harrison at Sterling Private Credit might call it, the headquarters of Phoenix." He flinched as if struck. It was true. The insane, impossible truth was standing right in front of him. "You," he whispered, his voice cracking. "It was you, all of it. All of it," she confirmed, her voice unwavering. "From the very first $2 million loan that you thought came from a brave VC firm. That was me. The Chimera software, the Nightingale medical patents, the capital for the Leeson acquisition. All of it flowed from here, from my father's legacy through me to you. I wanted you to succeed, Marcus. I believed in the man I married, in the dreams he had." She walked slowly towards him, her composure absolute. "I built you a kingdom and I placed a crown on your head. I was happy to live in the shadows, to be the quiet force that ensured your success. Because I thought we were a team. I thought we were building a life together." Tears began to well in Marcus's eyes. They were not tears of remorse, but of pure, pathetic self-pity. "Why?" he choked out. "Why would you do this? Why destroy it all?" A flicker of something not anger, but a deep, profound disappointment crossed her face. "You still don't see it, do you?" she said, her voice softening with a touch of pity. "You think this is about revenge. You think I did this because you left me for a younger woman. That was merely the catalyst, Marcus, the symptom of the disease. The disease," she continued, "was your belief that you did it all alone. The arrogance that led you to believe I was nothing more than a decorative object in the world you built. You didn't just discard a wife, Marcus. You erased your partner. You looked at the architect of your entire existence and told her she was... You offered me a stipend from my own fortune." She stopped directly in front of him. "I didn't destroy anything. I am simply reclaiming what is and always has been mine. Thorn Industries was a brand name, a vessel. The value, the technology, the capital, that is all mine. It has been recalled." He finally broke. The titan of industry crumpled his suit, hanging loosely on his suddenly frail frame. He fell to his knees, a desperate, broken man. "Saraphina, please," he sobbed, reaching for her hand. "I'm sorry. I didn't know. I was a fool. I was arrogant. Please don't do this. We can fix it. We can put it back together. I love you. I've always loved you." Saraphina looked down at the man at her feet, the man she had once loved so fiercely. She felt a pang, not of affection, but of a sad, final closure. She gently pulled her hand away. "No, Marcus," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. "You loved the reflection of yourself that you saw in my support. You loved the success. The man I loved would never have become you." She walked to her desk and picked up a single file. "My lawyers have finalized the divorce. You will be left with the original seed money of $2 million adjusted for inflation. It is, I believe, a generous settlement. Enough for you to have what you truly wanted all along, the chance to be a self-made man. This time for real." She placed the file on the desk, the final act in their long and complicated story. "Goodbye, Marcus." He remained on his knees, sobbing in the center of the vast office, a king deposed, left with nothing but the crushing, unbearable weight of the truth. Saraphina turned back to the window, looking out at the city skyline, at her city. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the canyons of steel and glass. It was the end of an era, and the beginning of her own. The descent from the PHX building was like falling through his own life in reverse, when Marcus Thorne stepped out of the private elevator and into the indifferent bustle of the lobby. The world he re-entered was one he no longer recognized, because he no longer recognized himself. The city, his city, felt like a foreign country. The towering skyscrapers he once saw as monuments to his own ambition now seemed to mock him, their glassy surfaces reflecting a stranger back at him, a man in a suit that suddenly felt 2 sizes too big, his face a pasty mask of shock. He walked for hours a ghost on the familiar streets of Manhattan. He saw the Thorne Industries logo on the side of a delivery truck and felt a phantom limb twinge of ownership before the crushing reality set in. It wasn't his. It had never been his. The name, once a source of immense pride, was now a brand of shame. News of the company's spectacular implosion was everywhere. The financial press, once his fawning courtiers, were brutal. They called him Icarus, a charlatan, a front man whose genius was merely a well-marketed illusion. Whispers of the mysterious phoenix gave the story a mythical, almost supernatural quality, casting him as the foolish mortal who had angered a god. His $2 million, the generous settlement, landed in a newly opened bank account. A few years ago, it would have been a rounding error. Now it was his entire world. His first instinct, the only one he knew, was to use it to get back in the game. He called old contacts, former allies, men with whom he had shared expensive scotch and celebrated billion-dollar deals. The response was universally frigid. Doors that had once swung open at the mere mention of his name were now firmly bolted. "Marcus, I'm sorry, now's not a good time," one said, his voice strained with discomfort. "Listen, man, I heard what happened. It's crazy stuff. I can't get involved," said another, before hanging up abruptly. He was radioactive. No one wanted to be associated with the man who had somehow lost an entire empire overnight. They didn't know the specifics of Saraphina's involvement, but they knew one thing: Marcus Thorne was a bad bet. He had been exposed not just as a failure, but as a fraud. The charisma he had always relied on now seemed cheap and hollow. His confident pronouncements, the ravings of a deluded has-been. He leased a small, characterless apartment in a nondescript building on the Upper West Side. From his window he could see the distant, glittering spire of the PHX building, a constant, painful reminder of the power he had squandered. The loneliness was an oppressive physical presence. Chloe was a distant memory, her social media feed now filled with photos of her on a yacht in St. Bart's with a European DJ. His corporate friends were gone. There was no one to call, no one to blame, but the man in the mirror, and he stared at that man. For hours, he tried to cling to the narrative that had defined him. He tried to convince himself that he had been brilliant, that his insights were real, that Saraphina had merely provided the fuel for a rocket he had designed and built. but the memories, recontextualized by the truth, offered no comfort. He remembered her seemingly off-the-cuff remarks that sparked his genius ideas. He remembered her calming presence during market panics, her quiet, "I have a feeling it will be all right," that he had mistaken for naive optimism, but now understood as absolute knowledge. He had been the lead actor in a play, reading lines he didn't even know had been written for him. The realization didn't come with a flash of insight, but with a slow, grinding erosion of his soul. He hadn't just lost his wealth, he had lost his very sense of self. While Marcus was wrestling with the ghosts of his past, Saraphina was building the future. She did not step into the role of a conquering CEO. The Thorn Industries' name was allowed to fade into ignominy, its assets either absorbed or dissolved. She had no interest in that kind of power. Instead, the PHX office was transformed. The name on the directory changed from the anonymous acronym to the Chen Carter Foundation. She had insisted on including Benjamin's family name, a testament to a partnership built on generations of trust, not ego. The foundation's mission statement was simple and profound: to invest in foundational change. The ghost was gone. Saraphina Chen had emerged. She was no longer operating from the shadows. She chaired the foundation's first board meeting not as a silent benefactor, but as a hands-on, deeply engaged leader. The portfolio she presented was breathtaking in its ambition. It included massive funding for carbon capture technology, the establishment of global incubators for female-led startups in developing nations, and a revolutionary program to bring arts and music education into underserved schools. Profit is a byproduct of purpose, not the goal itself, she told her new board, a hand-picked team of leading scientists, ethicists, and innovators. For 2 decades, I watched capital being used to build ego. Now we will use it to build a legacy of substance. Her days were filled with a vitality she hadn't felt in years. She reconnected with her academic roots, hosting salons in her new, elegant but comfortable home, a classic brownstone she was renovating, where brilliant minds could debate and collaborate. She walked through the halls of the Met, not as Mrs. Thorne, the high society patron, but as Saraphina Chen, the art historian losing herself in the brushstrokes of a sergeant finding joy in the quiet contemplation he had stolen from her. One of her first official acts as head of the foundation was to invite Dr. Alistair Finch to her office. The geneticist who had been left adrift by the collapse of the Thorne Foundation arrived looking wary and defeated. "Dr. Finch," Saraphina began, her voice warm with genuine admiration. "The work you are doing is too important to be subject to the whims of corporate vanity. The Chen Carter Foundation would like to fully and permanently endow your research institute. You will have complete academic freedom and the resources you need to pursue your work for as long as it takes." Tears welled in the elderly scientist's eyes. He had been struggling for years, patching together grants at the mercy of donors who wanted their names on buildings. "Mrs. Thorne, I don't know what to say." "Please," she said with a gentle smile, "call me Saraphina. And this is not a donation. It's an investment in humanity. You are the kind of visionary the world needs." He looked at her, truly seeing her for the first time. "No, Miss Chen," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "You are." It was a title she had deflected her entire life, a truth she had hidden even from herself. Now she simply nodded, accepting it as a responsibility she had finally grown into. Months later, Marcus sat in a dimly lit sports bar nursing a beer. He was avoiding his empty apartment. On the television above the bar, A financial news channel was running a special segment. "Titans of Tomorrow," the graphic read. The face that appeared on screen was Saraphina's. She was being interviewed at a global economic forum, speaking eloquently about the intersection of technology and ethical philanthropy. She looked radiant, energized, and profoundly at peace. She was introduced not as the ex-wife of a disgraced CEO, but as Saraphina Chen, the visionary founder of the world's most innovative new foundation. Marcus couldn't breathe. He fumbled for his wallet, threw some cash on the bar, and fled into the cold night air. He had thought the worst thing in the world was losing his fortune. He was wrong. The worst thing was seeing the vibrant, brilliant world he could have been a part of, a world he had been too blind and too arrogant to appreciate thriving so magnificently without him. He hadn't just lost a wife or a benefactor. He had lost the source. And without her, he was nothing more than an echo in an empty room. In the end, Marcus Thorne learned the hardest lesson of all the difference between being on top of the world and being the world itself. Saraphina didn't just take back her money. She took back her power, her identity, and her story. She proves that the quietest person in the room is often the most powerful, and that underestimating the woman who stands beside you can be the most costly mistake of all. His world was a house of cards built on her foundation, and with one breath, she simply chose to let it fall. What do you think? Was this the ultimate act of justice or a cold, calculated revenge? What would you have done in Saraphina's position if you were captivated by this story of hidden power and ultimate vindication? Show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with anyone who appreciates a story where the scales are finally balanced. Most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss a single story of triumph and reckoning.